So with the recent announcement that the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy will be going multi-platform, there's been some concerns from fans that it would impact the quality of Remake Part 3. Well, the game's director Naoki Hamaguchi recently did an interview calming those concerns as he goes in depth with the technical aspects of this remake trilogy. And when I say in depth, I mean in depth. GPUs, CPUs, MTVs, VH1s, you get the idea. So we're going to check that out in today's video. So let's talk about it. So today's write-up comes to us from Ayu Kawase, or Ayuwa Kawase, I hope I get the pronunciation right on that name, from Automaton Media. Now, I've covered a lot of interviews over the years, and I kind of really enjoy the Automaton ones. They're usually very well written, they're concise, they ask some really great questions of their interviewees. They're just all around pretty solid reads. So I'll leave a link in the description down below if you would like to read the entire article for yourself. Again, they do some great work over there. But we start off first with them asking Hamaguchi, all right, you're multi-platform now. Is that going to affect the overall quality of Part 3? Hamaguchi responds by saying, both the Switch 2 and Xbox versions have been incredibly well received and generated a lot of buzz online, and that attention has also made me realize how many people are worried about this issue. However, our decision to go multi-platform with the 7 Remake series will not in any way lower the quality of the third installment. Our development structure simply doesn't work that way to begin with. I suppose I'll just have to keep saying it. He proceeds to laugh. And don't worry, he goes full in depth with that specific development structure later in the interview, and it's pretty cool. It all starts with the PC. Now, you might be thinking, and there's a lot of people out there that do think this because I see it in my comments, oh, this is just PR talk, right? Of course he's going to say that. He doesn't want people to worry. And for those of you out there who feel that way, the interview pushes back and gives a very similar response by saying, you know, it's reassuring to hear you say that because I do know that you have a background as an engineer, but you're also the director of this game. You wouldn't say anything negative about it before it releases, right? This is just marketing talk. So how do you address that? Hamaguchi responds first by laughing. And then he says, I understand why people might think that, since I haven't previously had the chance to explain in detail why there's no need for concern. I'd like to take this opportunity to do so. I've heard that talk about this has been circulating ever since the Switch 2 and Xbox Series versions launched, so if I can help ease even a little of that anxiety, I'd be very glad. And it's at this point in the interview I imagine Hamaguchi rolls up his sleeves and tells them, all right, I'm gonna put on a masterclass of how we make these games, because this man is about to get into some crazy technical jargon and the nitty gritty of how all of this stuff comes to be. Some of it I'll try to summarize just for conciseness and the sake of time, but trust, this man knows what he's talking about. He was an engineer and programmer at Square Enix for over 20 years. He starts off by saying, when developing a game, there are 4 key points to consider across platforms. First is CPU, the computational side that governs character behavior and executes game logic. Second is the GPU, which handles graphics rendering and related tasks. The third is RAM, or memory, which determines how much data can be loaded while the game is running. You often hear that the Xbox Series S is difficult to port to, and that's largely because it has less memory compared to other platforms. If memory is insufficient, it can even cause the game to hang, as in freeze or stop responding. By contrast, the Switch 2 has ample memory, which makes it relatively easy to develop for in that respect. Finally, there's ROM, or storage media such as cartridges and discs. In the past, we often had to reduce data size to fit within physical media constraints. Broadly speaking, I believe these 4 elements are the key considerations in game development. And don't you worry, viewer, Hamaguchi's just getting started. He further breaks down all 4 of these important elements, which is pretty cool. He continues by saying, I'll break them down one by one. Regarding ROM and overall game size, the Switch 2 Physical Edition uses a game keycard through which data is downloaded. That means we don't need to shrink data just to fit on a cartridge or improve read speeds, so it's highly unlikely to affect game sizes on other platforms. As for RAM, the Switch 2's ample memory means there's little concern there. The Series X does have its limits, but we already optimized for each platform individually to the absolute limit. So memory constraints on one platform don't impose restrictions on others. Now about CPU. I feel like there's been a shift over the past 4 or 5 years. Traditionally, 30 frames per second was the basic standard for console RPGs, but with the arrival of the PS5 and Xbox Series X, we've entered an era where 60 frames per second is expected on consoles as well. So jumping back to the whole ROM thing, obviously Blu-ray discs can hold a lot of data. We might be in a situation where Remake Part 3 has 4 discs, 1 disc for install, 3 discs for the actual game to play, but we don't know for sure. And that also is the same for the Xbox series of consoles, specifically the Series X, because that still uses Blu-ray discs to actually run games. And of course, when you're looking at just downloading games, you have no constraints really there, although some of these companies like Sony and Microsoft do have data size limits to how big your game can actually be. And Remake Part 3 is gonna be a chunky one. Unless, they find a way to optimize it, which their optimization on this Remake trilogy has been really impressive so far. Now, when it comes to the Switch 2, there's obviously a lot of controversy there when it comes to the game keycards. While you are buying a physical version of the game, you are getting a physical game keycard, the game isn't technically on that keycard. You still have to download and then install more data from a server. So while you do have the physical game keycard, you don't actually own the physical game, which is a really big concern for a lot of people. They want to buy a physical edition and have that physical game with them. But this is kind of a compromise for the Switch 2 unless Nintendo can find a way to have better proprietary hardware for these cartridges. For now, the developers unfortunately just have to put most of the data on a server for you to download and then install, because these games have a lot of info in them and they need these games to run properly. And anything from like turning the camera and having data pop stuff in like textures and characters and enemies, that has to be done really fast, and that can only be done on the Switch 2 with something like a game keycard. So it's unfortunately a necessary evil, but that's kind of how they have to do it right now. Now, when it comes to the RAM, I'm really happy that he broke that down, because that in particular, I think, is where a lot of people's concerns are. If you're developing on a Switch 2 or an Xbox or a PS5, are the higher end versions going to be held back by that Switch 2? And Hamaguchi just says like they optimize for each console individually. And he's going to go further in depth with that later in the interview. And this is a part I will summarize. He does talk about the frame rate. He says that if a game ran at 30 frames per second on something like a PS4, the Switch 2, or the Xbox Series S, theoretically, that game should be able to run at 60 frames on higher end platforms. So what he's essentially saying there is that they don't specifically scale the frame rate to fit 30 frames per second. They're adjusting here based on headroom of what their CPU they're working with allows. It sounds kind of confusing, but again, they optimize based on each platform. But that extra bit of wiggle room allows them to still develop properly. So you may have more NPCs, for example, on a higher end platform and fewer NPCs on a lower end platform, but they're not, specifically holding back the higher end to meet the lower end, if that makes any sense. And he continues and finishes with GPU by saying, finally, the area most people are concerned about is GPU, the graphics processor. When a game launches across multiple platforms, many enjoy comparing the visual differences, like in those side-by-side comparison videos. He laughs. He's talking about Digital Foundry. Digital Foundry always gets out their fine-tooth comb. They're comparing every single version of these games side by side, and it's really cool from a technical curiosity standpoint, but for the most part, when you really think about it, people aren't going to play these games and stand and stare at a rock texture for 10 minutes. We're moving and grooving through these fields. Most of this is stuff you probably wouldn't notice unless you are actually looking for it. But again, knowing about the ins and outs of frame rate, GPU, CPU is pretty interesting, I think, personally. But he continues further addressing the concerns some people have when it comes to graphic disparity between platforms. He says, the main concern is that if development assumes hardware of a certain level as the standard, all platforms might be pulled to that level of quality. What I'd like to clarify first is that the highest end gaming environment is PC. While PC gaming is gradually expanding in Japan, overseas, growth has been even more rapid. The market has broadened tremendously across both consoles and PC. The 7 Remake series has sold very well on platforms like Steam and the Epic Game Store, so we develop assets with the broad PC market in mind. In fact, our 3D assets are created at the highest quality level based on PC as the foundation. When Rebirth launched, there was talk about how the PC version looked better than the PS5 version, and our philosophy will not change for the third installment. As our fundamental principle, we do not design assets to meet the lowest baseline. Instead, we create them for high-end environments first. We then apply what we call reduction, adjusting assets and tuning them appropriately for each platform. This means that we avoid negatively impacting high-spec platforms. This isn't unique to us either. I believe it's become fairly common practice among developers in recent years. So again, they develop first and foremost on PC and then optimize based on whatever platform they need to port to. So just because it's going to be on the Switch 2, that doesn't mean that the PS5 version is going to suffer or the PC version or Xbox versions. They create all of these assets high-end first and foremost on the PC, which Hamaguchi will talk about in the next question. But this is something that Hamaguchi has really stressed over the past few months, is that he wants to ensure that regardless of what platform you play one of these games on, he wants people to have a very similar experience. One version shouldn't look or run worse than the other version. He wants it to be pretty comparable. And so far, it seems like they've been able to do that, looking at 7 Remake on the Switch 2 and on the Xbox platforms, and now seeing how they've gotten Rebirth to look and run on a Switch 2. Somehow looks better than the base version on PS5. So they've learned a lot through optimization and working with experienced porting houses to ensure that none of these versions are compromised. And he goes further with the graphic stuff by saying, that's right, we fine-tune things to ensure the high-quality assets we create are delivered to players at a consistent level. While optimization is necessary to match each platform's specifications, I can state clearly that this does not impose any constraints on high-end hardware. So again, PC is the lead platform. They create all of their high-end models and textures, the highest quality they can possibly go, obviously, taking into consideration data sizes. And then they basically splinter off from there. They've got the PS5 version, the PS5 Pro version, the Series X version, Series S, Nintendo Switch 2, but they're all optimized for their own specific hardware needs. So just because it's on the Switch 2, that doesn't mean that it's going to hold back the PC version or the PS5 version. And when you look at a lot of these consoles nowadays, specifically PS5 and Xbox, they're not really all that different internally in terms of their hardware. And even looking at the Switch 2, again, Hamaguchi emphasized there are a lot of things that are important on the Switch 2, like the CPU, which has way more room than something like a Series S does. So there's a lot of factors that go into how these different versions are made, but he's really stressing, like, we're gonna make sure all these versions are great, and there will still be people who doubt him and say maybe he's lying or like that's not gonna be the case, but like, this is a very open and honest technical interview that Hamaguchi is giving on the ins and outs of how these games are ported and even developed for at the same time. He does go on to also say that, of course, they consider PC the higher end range, and something like a PS5 and even the PS5 Pro are considered mid-range platforms. And he talks about, there could be some texture differences there, maybe even some of the polygon counts being different too, but again, that determines, based on hardware. So anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times different. When it comes to mesh loading, it can be like a 1.5 to 2 times different. Polygons can even be 3 times different. But for the most part, they're optimized very well. And he does say that something like the Steam Deck, for example, is on the lower end of specifications because it operates at half the baseline, or I believe less than half the baseline of something like a PS5. And he continues further by saying, that's correct, meaning they optimize for each platform individually. By the way, when adapting the game for each platform, simply lowering quality across the board isn't necessarily the solution, because this can compromise the intended visual expression. That's why we make sure to review everything by eye and fine-tune so that each port matches the original vision. So again, optimize based on platform, and it's not a situation like he says where it's like, well, the solution would be to just lower the quality of everything across all these platforms to get them to run evenly. You really got to kind of fine tune to each of these consoles' strength. And again, like I mentioned before, there's not a lot of differences between a PC and a PS5 and an Xbox. The Switch 2 is kind of a unique situation. That's a really powerful tablet that somehow is able to run Rebirth. But again, be rest assured here, they're doing their best. So up next, the interviewer asks them about some concerns that some fans have of saying, well, instead of going multi-platform and spending resources on these lower end versions of the game, wouldn't it be better suited to take those resources and make new content or improve your existing assets? How does Hamaguchi respond to that? He says, I see, and he laughs. Let me put it this way. By making the 7 Remake series multi-platform, we're increasing the number of players who can access and play the game. That means our work can reach more people. Naturally, that leads to higher overall sales. With that additional revenue, we can forecast returns and reinvest them into development. In other words, if supporting a particular platform is expected to increase sales by a certain amount, that allows us to expand our development budget and resources accordingly. That said, to be honest, my biggest reason is that as a creator, I'm genuinely happy when more people get to play the games we've made. And I'm glad he said that, and I think that's something that I wish more people understood, because you do have those people out there who are like, no, they shouldn't make this game on Switch 2 or Xbox, it should be PlayStation 5 only, there's no reason to port, it's not going to sell well, there's no audience over there, which, based on the performance of 7 Remake and potentially 7 Rebirth on the Switch 2, that was a lie. These games have been performing very well, not just from the technical aspect, but from a sales perspective too. And if you want your games to be successful and you want them to be healthy, and I've been saying this for years now, a company like Square Enix needs to be multi-platform, day and date specifically. That's the only way you're really going to see higher sales and a healthier overall game. And I think moving into the future, a platform like the Switch 2 might end up being the most important platform for Final Fantasy moving forward. There's clearly a lot of fans over there who love RPGs and JRPGs or Final Fantasy or things like Dragon Quest, and they're hungry for those types of games on their platform. And now that they can get access to them, that's really good. And the more sales you have, the more money you make, the more you can take that and reinvest it into whatever games you're going to be developing for in the future. So the sales performance of this trilogy, especially going multi-platform, could theoretically help a future Final Fantasy game or a future Square Enix game. It's kind of like movies. When a really big budget movie is successful, that studio can then take some of that money and make a smaller film or make another big budget film or something mid-range. So it's kind of like a rising tides raises all boats situation. And of course, just at its core, it's really nice for everybody to get a chance to experience this remake trilogy and how awesome it is. Because regardless of whether or not you like it, it's very clear that the developers put a lot of work into it. They're passionate about it, and it's a very good, high-quality trilogy so far. And as a fan, I just want more people to experience that too. And to end the interview, the interviewer asks Hamaguchi, all right, this is some good stuff, but there are people that are worried that because you're working on multi-platform versions of Part 3, will that hold back the development team when they're making Part 3? Because now they have to focus on different things. What do you got to say about that? Hamaguchi says, we have a dedicated unit within my team that handles porting work, and they operate separately from the team developing the third installment. The porting unit is deeply committed and has been tuning those versions with meticulous care, so I trust them and oversee their work from a distance. That allows me to focus on the third game. Development of the third installment is progressing very smoothly, and we're almost exactly on schedule with the milestones we set at the beginning of the project. The game is already in a playable state, and right now, we're in the final push phase, refining and building up the experience. We're at the stage where the quality improves day by day, and each time we play it, the scenery feels different, so it's genuinely exciting. I think it won't be too long before we're able to share some kind of update with everyone. So I hope people, really paid attention to that first part. It's not the same team who's making Remake Part 3 that is also handling the ports. They have dedicated teams that handle all of this stuff, which Hamaguchi talked about in an interview I covered. Was it sometime last year where he broke down we've got a team that handles Remake Part 3, and then we have a team that handles the porting. And I think that's how he broke it down. There's the Remake Part 3 team, there's the porting team, and like I said earlier, there are the people that can kind of jump from one to the other, based on whatever needs are needed. And this is also just a really nice update on development. This is almost a little bit more detailed than some of the stuff he said in recent interviews, where he's now just saying we're in the final push phase now, refining and building up the experience. And for him to say that, our builds are essentially changing day by day, that means they're making a lot of progress. And based on everything Hamaguchi has been saying in every interview that's come out for the past year plus, they are on schedule with whatever development structure they had for Remake Part 3. So those big milestones they have planned, they will most likely meet them. They haven't had any setbacks of any kind. Hamaguchi has really fine-tuned the structure of how these games are made. He knows his team well, their strengths, their weaknesses. He seems to be a very good project manager, and you have to take into account, he's managing teams of like 300 plus people. This is not an easy task, and he had to do that through COVID when they were developing Rebirth. So the guy knows how to handle all of this, and they're clearly on track to meet whatever milestones they have planned, which could be Summer Game Fest, for example, or we want to do Tokyo Game Show at this point, or we're on track to make it to the Game Awards. So they know what they're doing. Now, when it comes to him saying, hopefully we can share some more information soon, I think one thing people need to understand is that time works a little differently for developers than it does us, the fans. So Hamaguchi saying soon, for us, we would think, oh, maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months max. For a developer, that can mean anywhere from 6 to 7 months. And no, I didn't mean to make a 6-7 joke. Those are just the numbers that seem to make the most sense to me. So time moves a little differently. Everyone just needs to be very patient before we get updates on Part 3. In this situation, they're just putting their head down and making sure that the game is being worked on meticulously and that it comes out the way that they intended it to come out. And I know there were a lot of people who were going into February State of Play with the hope and almost like confidence, like extreme confidence that Remake Part 3 was going to be there, and they ended up very disappointed because it wasn't there. The State of Play was great. I did a reaction and a breakdown to that video, which not a lot of people watch, which understandable, it's not focused specifically on Final Fantasy, but I'll reiterate what I said at the end of that video for the Final Fantasy fans that are maybe disappointed that Remake Part 3 wasn't there, or maybe they're getting kind of concerned of like, when are we going to see it? There's a lot of factors that are going into Part 3. As we know, the game is no longer exclusive to Sony, and it's based on what they're saying, sounding like it could launch day and date on everything, which would be phenomenal. And I have no proof of how any of this works, but years ago we covered an article where this was back when Microsoft was trying to buy Activision Blizzard, and they had to go through a lot of court processes. And Sony decided to stick their nose in there. And they're like, yeah, what Microsoft is doing, we don't like that either. You shouldn't allow it. And the courts were like, oh, Sony, you're here? Well, turns out you got to tell us about your exclusivity deals too. And in that deal, it listed Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XVI as permanent console exclusives. We know now that's not the case. 16 is available on Xbox. There's also the possibility it could go to Switch too. That was something that Yoshi P was even, throwing around recently. But my idea, again, this is just my own thought process. I don't have any firm details on any of this. But what I'm thinking is the exclusivity agreement between Sony and Square might have been 10 years. When they first showed off 7 Remake for realsies at that PlayStation experience, it was 2015. 10 years go by, and now suddenly they're able to announce, oh yeah, this trilogy, it's going to be multi-platform. So my thought process is that exclusivity agreement wasn't permanent. It was maybe 10 years. And maybe that also goes with the marketing, because as of right now, we don't know who kind of is going to handle the marketing for the trilogy moving forward. There's a possibility that maybe Sony still has first dibs on marketing Part 3, although you would think if they did, maybe they would have wanted something at State of Play. So either Sony still has first dibs on that marketing, or they no longer have first dibs on the Remake trilogy for the marketing or exclusivity on launch because their deal expired. Again, I don't quite know the details and the ins and outs of how this came to be, but it's likely that we're looking at a situation now where it's just going to be Square promoting the game and not relying on Sony to market it for them. And again, I've been under the impression that the marketing for Remake Part 3 will probably follow the marketing that 7 Remake took. And I've been under this belief for a while now, meaning that maybe sometime in May, they could tease something in regards to Part 3, which leads to an actual reveal in June. And then from June to August, maybe you get another trailer. info dumps, more interviews. And then in September, we got Tokyo Game Show, which they could do a really big gameplay blowout there. And then from September to November, maybe another trailer, more info dumps. And then in December, we got the Game Awards, which could have a brand new trailer. And we're all hoping that maybe they can release this game early 2027. So winter 2027, anytime between January and the 1st of April, essentially. But we don't really know. But I'll end the video by reiterating what I said in that State of Play video, because I want people to hear this. And I know a lot of people didn't watch that video. But just be patient. I get that there are people upset or disappointed that we didn't get any updates for part 3. Some of that comes from people like us who make videos and hype up these events and question, will it be there? Some people go very far with it and they're like, no, it's gonna be there. I'm convinced. Hamaguchi telepathically communicated to me that it's gonna be at State of Play. And I always tell people, please keep your expectations in check. But the time that we are in right now is so incredibly unique and special because it will probably never ever happen ever again. There will never be another moment, probably, where we are waiting for a brand new Final Fantasy VII game, especially within a trilogy. So the time that we are in right now is really special and unique. We are in, as I said in that State of Play video, an unknown journey. We're in a waiting phase that will never ever happen ever again. This will be the final time that we get to speculate on what they're gonna do with the story. The final time we'll be able to, theorize about combat and how they're gonna change things up. How do we fight the weapons? What, actual materia is gonna be there, and synergy stuff and weapons and upgrades, and what are the environments gonna be like? What are we gonna do with the high wind? This is the last time that we are gonna be able to do any of that stuff. So I just think that as fans, I get it. We want more info on part 3. I'm excited for it as much as the next guy, but I think we just need to stop and savor the time that we are in and truly enjoy it, because this downtime is honestly, truly special, and it will never, ever happen again. Because once the marketing actually starts for Remake Part 3, it's the beginning of our Remake Part 3 journey, but it's the beginning of the end of our 7 Remake trilogy journey, and it won't happen ever again. So just stop, smell the roses, and appreciate the time that we are currently in because of how cool it is. With that being said, that's the video. I am Curious Corduroy. Let me know in the comments down below if you are someone who is maybe concerned about the franchise going multi-platform and worried about that affecting Part 3's quality. What did you think of the interview? Are you now not as concerned? Do you still have concerns? Let me know in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.